And so it was extremely disheartening to put it out there, especially when I'm seeing my savings account dwindle very quickly.
Uh-huh.
And I can't even count how many hours and days and weeks planning for the launch of it and having people say, well, I'm interested. But then when you put it out there, it's crickets. And I vividly remember being in my apartment in Paris and checking the email every day to no inquiries, no responses, and crying every single day for weeks because I was like, hey, maybe I wasn't meant to do this.
You're tuned in to the Event Gems podcast, the podcast where coaches, consultants, and speakers learn how to produce transformational and profitable events. I'm your host, Natasha Wright, Chief Experience Curator at the Diamond Butterfly. Join me and other industry experts as we teach you how to maximize the power of your next brand building event. Time to drop those gems. Let's fly.
In this episode, we're joined by Natanya Bravo, a transformational business and mindset coach who left a successful corporate career to follow her dreams of living in Paris. After a decade working with Fortune 500 brands, Natanya took a bold leap and founded The Bravo Life, a global community that empowers women to live purposefully and authentically. In this episode, Natanya shares her approach to creating impactful retreats, the importance of inner transformation, and how to connect with your audience on a deeper level. But before we dive into the episode, are you hosting your first event and feeling overwhelmed? I totally get it. That's exactly where I was when I was hosting my first event, which is why I created the Diamond in the Rough Event Host Guide to help you go from confusion to clarity. This guide comes with videos and worksheets to help you plan with confidence so you can focus on truly creating a memorable experience. Now let's dive into the episode. Welcome to the conversation. So excited to bring on Natanya Bravo. Welcome, Natanya.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
I was reading through your bio and you mentioned that you listened to your internal voice, moved to Paris, and stepped into a more purposeful and dream-filled life. And I was so interested in that because I felt like it was a similar call from me with me stepping into entrepreneurship, where I got the call to do this event that I had never done before, didn't have any experience, was apprehensive about doing it, but that internal voice just would not leave me alone. Like, do this thing, do this thing, do this thing. How did you make that courageous move to listen to your internal voice and buy a one-way ticket? And did you have a plan where you're going to come back? You're like, I'm just going to go for a month and figure out how long. Let me know a little bit more about that experience.
Yeah, I mean, that's the short version of the story. I think it was not easy, but what made it easier is that I spent probably over 10 years ignoring that internal voice. And for all of us that know, when you have signs, you're being guided towards something and you ignore it, that little rock on your window becomes a pebble, and then it becomes a bigger rock, and then it becomes a boulder. So what was very comfortable in my life started to become uncomfortable. So while on paper, I was meeting certain benchmarks, checking off the boxes of what they tell you a successful young woman should do, buy a house, do all the things, internally, I was miserable. And so I was having anxiety attacks where I would take myself to the hospital, or friends would have to take me to the hospital. I was stressed. I was getting easily 200 emails a day. Even my IT department was like, I have no idea how you're doing this. I would stay up till 2 a.m. working, wake up at 6 a.m. And while I really enjoyed the work that I do, which I know we're going to talk about a little bit more, I knew that I was just barely scratching the surface and was in no way walking in purpose. I was just doing what I was good at. And a friend asked me a question I think we should all ask for ourselves, which is, what's something you've always wanted to do that you never said out loud? And I said, I always wanted to move to Paris. And she's like, oh my gosh, you have to do it. And at the time I was like, girl, you're insane. But something about her excitement made me be like, why not? And so I spent the next weeks and months being like, are these real reasons, or are these just excuses for what is now comfortable, what I know? And what is the real risk here? I know that I'm hireable. I can always go back and get a job. Somewhere is going to hire me. It might take a bit, but I'm not married. I don't have kids. So I know that not everyone's in those positions. When I made this decision, I was single. I didn't have children. And so that did help, where I knew worst case scenario, I blow through all my savings for a year and I come back and just start back over where I am. But at least I know I tried. And I think that part made it easier, but it wasn't easy. I believe that we truly always know. We just don't want to admit it to ourselves because it sounds too big, too scary, or and not for me, or I can't do that. But we always know what we truly want. We may not know the details of it.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Oh, that's so powerful. Okay. So let's dive into retreats. So with the Bravo Life, I know that you have a couple different offerings, but what really inspired you to offer retreats within your company?
Yeah, retreats was I think it was one of my first offers. My first offer was actually a $25 online workshop. But once I got over my fear of actually being paid for something online, retreats was the second thing I put out. And it was because my prior career was in brand marketing and events. So I did large scale event experiential productions for all types of brands from Mercedes, Target to Nordstrom, all over the world. And so I was really comfortable planning. I used to plan huge festivals. We do things like Coachella, the Grammys, the Oscars. I loved event planning. I know a lot of people are not planners by nature, which I get, but I know you probably are. I am. Where that just the logistics, that was easy for me. And I personally love travel. That's how I really discovered myself, got through shyness and being introverted and really figuring out what it is that I want to be able to boldly say those things. And so being able to mesh those two things together as I was starting the Bravo Life, I didn't really know what it was going to become. I was really just genuinely sharing my story and what I was learning about myself and inviting whoever else was on a similar journey to follow along. And what better way than to be able to do that in person in another beautiful destination. Our first retreat was in the south of France. And I felt comfortable with the idea of planning the retreat. The harder part was now I'm not behind the scenes. I'm actually hosting an event, which I hadn't. Obviously, when you're an event planner and doing production and marketing, you're behind the scenes.
Always behind the scenes. Exactly. How did you step into being comfortable to move in that direction?
Yeah, it didn't happen on the first one, I can say. I think it's been each one getting more and more comfortable with trusting myself because the first one, I didn't know. I think we had 11 women and I didn't know 10 of the women at all. And so I knew that I was going to create a great experience. Again, coming from an event background, I knew I could do all that. But the idea of, oh, they're coming for you and like to learn from you and be with you and speak with you and work with you. It was uncomfortable, definitely the first time where I had some fear and imposter syndrome. And am I going to be good enough? And maybe overcompensating with decor and things that were actually less important to the experience than what I had to authentically share. But I was still learning my voice. So I think to answer your question, it was through actually just doing it. You can't, some things you can plan in your brain and some things you just got to do it to get better at it.
Yeah, because that's one of the things that I find with especially new event hosts or even a retreat host. There's so many things that are involved in putting this together, or it seems like such a monumental task. I actually spoke with someone recently. She had an idea for, I think maybe like 4 or 5 years where she wanted to do this event for women who had recently been divorced. And so she wanted to be able to support them because it's such what could be a demoralizing process, a depressing process. And so she wanted to be able to help support and heal them in their divorce journey. And she'd been thinking about it for about 4 years, probably even longer. That was probably one of those things that she never admitted out loud that that's what she wanted to do. And then finally came to that place where like, okay, this is something I'd love to do. But just not trusting herself enough to be that person who's in front of the room. She is someone who's successful by all means in her career. But that piece of it, that piece where you now have to be vulnerable, bringing people together, talking about your own story, allowing them to share their own story and supporting them through that journey. Beyond the logistics of it all, I think that was what it was for her.
Yeah.
That vulnerability.
For sure. It's easy to share a skill that you're good at. It's a lot harder to share just you authentically and vulnerably and maybe not perfectly curated and designed. And what does that look like? And that's what I meant by you have to find your own voice, because you may see me or you host an event and retreat, but okay, I'm going to do what they did, but that's probably not going to feel good for you. So you have to figure out what does.
That's a great point. When I'm thinking about a retreat feels so much more intimate. So when you think about a conference and you're on stage and there's a lights, you could feel like a rock star. You could feel like you get to your Sasha Fierce when you're on stage, right? And you're somewhat disconnected from the audience. Not to say that you're not going to serve them and provide information that's going to be transformational, but you're somewhere removed. So stepping into a retreat could feel like a very intimate and vulnerable space. So how do you create spaces like that, not only for yourself, but for other women who come to your retreats?
Yeah. So a few things. I actually find for myself and clients who are more introverted, we'll say, they thrive in more intimate environments than having to be with a room of 100 people can be really overwhelming for them. So I think in terms of how you create that space, I always believe that you have to lead with what it is you're asking for people. You cannot ask people to go out to strangers and share about themselves if you yourself are not willing to do that. And so I'm usually the first person to like rip off the Band-Aid and say, okay, we can all stop pretending that we're perfect now and let's have a real conversation. And I think that gives people a breath of fresh air, like, oh, we can actually go there with this.
Yes.
Okay, finally I can share, I can open up. And it doesn't always have to be negative or down, but just having more than, how are you? I'm good. How are you? Type conversation is really soul fueling and giving. And I think a lot of us are craving that. And so you as the host have to lead by creating that environment and sometimes being the first to go. You can't go and say, okay, everyone share when you haven't shared.
You set the tone for what that environment or what that experience is going to be, because it's almost like a bubble, an incubator somewhat that you're creating, and you're letting everyone who's in it feel safe enough to relax and not be their titles and not be their labels and all of those things, but just really share from the intimate and soul levels. Feels so inviting and so relaxing energetically. I'm just thinking about a lot of times when we attend events, especially for our business, it's always like, get the next strategy. We got to get the next
and
marketing.
exchange business cards. And it's very,
Exactly.
There are benefits to those transactional. Yeah, for sure. And there are benefits to conferences and things like that. But I do think more and more people are craving a place where they do not have to, nobody knows what they do. It doesn't even matter in the space.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely a balance for sure. I had watched one of your master classes and you talked about that first retreat that you did. No one registered, I believe. You had 0 registration. What was that feeling like for you? Putting this time and energy into creating this event or this retreat, and you're hoping that people are going to come, and they didn't come. And you mentioned how you transitioned that. You realize, okay, I need to dial in on my messaging, reshift some things in my marketing to allow those persons that I want to be attracted to this event. So can you talk about that, opening up the retreat, having 0 registration, and then going from dialing your messaging to then, I believe you said that you sold out in 2 weeks, which is incredible. So can you talk a little bit about that experience?
Yes, for sure. So this was still the first year I'd moved to Paris. So I was still living off of my savings. I did not have a job. I had just started to build this online community, didn't really know what that was, and starting to do like a few, like I said, little workshops here and there online only. And so for everyone that knows, when you go to launch something, whether it's a retreat, a course, whatever it is, there's a lot that goes into it, from the colors, the names, the fonts, the logos, building a landing page, especially when you are not tech savvy. Like I definitely was not and am not in many ways, creating the graphics, writing the social media posts, writing the emails. And so it was extremely disheartening to put it out there, especially when I'm seeing my savings account dwindle very quickly. And I can't even count how many hours and days and weeks planning for the launch of it and having people say, well, I'm interested. But then when you put it out there, it's crickets. And I vividly remember being in my apartment in Paris and checking the email every day to no inquiries, no responses, and crying every single day for a week because I was like, hey, maybe I wasn't meant to do this. Maybe I just need to go back and find a job, or really a lot of self-doubt because I wasn't as far into entrepreneurship. So I didn't understand that is just part of
that's a part of it. Yeah. I'll get the job. Right. Highs and the lows. Right.
Exactly. This was my first big down. And so the other part of it was, while I was professionally doing brand marketing, I was doing it for other brands. So doing it for myself, I didn't know how to do that. How do I market myself? I wasn't tuned into how to do that for myself as I was for a corporation or a corporate brand. And so I had to pick up my ego and not get so caught up in the stories of, oh, it's not going to work, I'm not good enough, and actually look strategically of, okay, what is the disconnect here? Where can I get more, as you said, dialed in with my messaging, my audience, actually connecting with people? Because I wasn't just trying to sell a group trip. I wanted people to really come for an experience together, a transformation together. And that was not as well articulated in my messaging if I was looking at it objectively. But to look at it objectively, I had to get out of, have my cry, and then get over myself and actually look
All right,
at
let's go.
that the
Right.
metrics. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, I did relaunch it. I took probably 3 months to figure out what I needed to change, did some market research, which a lot of people aren't willing to do, like get on the calls with people and say, what do you want from this? What don't you like about this? And be willing to actually really get and receive feedback from multiple people, because that feels vulnerable to put yourself out there and say, I really want to do this. Can you help me? But I did that. And then we did relaunch it, and it sold out in a couple weeks.
And is it 2 weeks from the time that you launched it that
Yeah.
it sold out?
Then I relaunched it, meaning I
relaunched it. Right.
down, I stopped talking about it. And then maybe 3 or 4 months later, I did like a relaunch, new dates, the same location. We just changed the dates to give me more time to sell it, because I thought it was going to take a while to sell. So 2 weeks from the relaunch to sold out, and it was 11 women.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
2 weeks, because retreats are, it's not like an event where it might be $200 or it might be $1,000. You know, some conferences are $1,500 and up, right? But a retreat, usually you're looking at $3,000.
And they have to buy their flights. Yeah.
Exactly. The fact that you were able to get that done within 2 weeks, it means that something clicked, right? And so what you made the shift in people not buying and then relaunching and getting that sold out and having 11 people?
Yeah. So I teach to my clients a process I call connected storytelling, which is how do you market by telling stories and not just, hi, I'm Natanya, and here's my entire life story. People really want to see themselves. We all are selfishly wanting to know, how does this serve and help me? And so through my updated messaging, marketing, the sales page, I was telling my story, but I was really telling every woman that I wanted to attract to this retreat story, so that they could see themselves, even if they didn't know exactly what we were going to talk about at the retreat. It was something in the language had them say, oh, this is for me. And that is through really connecting with them on a personal level, instead of trying to, I think I was leading before with the logistics of this villa and this chef, and this is the outing we're going to do. And that is so secondary on a retreat. People are really wanting to understand, what is the experience I'm going to have before they're going to say yes to, okay, where we're staying and all the how much it costs and the payment plans. Yes, they have to make that decision too, but they first have to make that transformation decision, which I think just making the switch from selling logistics to selling an actual transformation is what helped a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Within this conversation, I'm bringing up what is the difference between a retreat and, for example, if you do a conference or you're doing any other events for your business. I do think that there is a distinction that we should definitely have that conversation. And so that's probably why I'm bringing in these things, right? And about the conferences, and I'm talking about the retreat, because even though they're events, they serve different purposes, and they're different in how they're structured. Right.
Yeah.
So with this, we're talking about it being a smaller, more intimate group. It's a longer period of time or a longer immersion period. And so based on what you're saying, it's that it's not so much the tactics or the things that you're going to learn so much that is the selling point for a retreat. Yes, you should be making an emotional connection, but I think with regards to what you're saying, it's more the experience and how people are going to feel connected within that space and feel safe within that space to truly authentically be themselves.
Yeah, 100%. I think conferences, and again, we're using general terms, but conferences and summits are usually focused on external learning. So we want to know, what am I going to learn here? What are the expert topics that are going to teach me new information, as opposed to retreats tend to be about an internal experience and shift of who do I get to become through this experience. So that is, regardless of what your niche is, that is generally how I typically see people positioning them slightly differently. When I go to a conference, I want to learn something, as opposed to whatever the retreat is about, whether you talked about your client divorce, someone else might be about, healing or inner child, or just, it could even be about a business retreat. But again, I think if you're calling it a retreat, it's going to be less about let's build out your marketing plan and a little bit more about the woman or the person behind the business and who you need to become to really bring that marketing plan to life.
So you talked about the connected storytelling aspect of it. That was one of the strategies that you used to attract your ideal clients to your retreat. Are there marketing strategies that listeners should be thinking about or that they should be adding to the mix if they are looking to do a retreat?
Yeah, I think for sure. And I'll just give a quick tip on the connected storytelling, which I also share on my Instagram page, which is using language where it becomes a conversation, which I know feels awkward to do the first few times you might try it out, because ultimately you're the only one posting. You don't get to actually have that feedback. But what I find people do is they will either say, you. So you want to come on this experience and you want to experience this and you want to learn this. Or they will say, I'm so excited about hosting this experience and I have so much planned. And it's not a two-way conversation. It's either you're talking at people or you're just talking about yourself. Whereas I think there's an opportunity to have a dialogue. And so I teach my clients and people in my community something really quick you can use, which is you, we, me, I. So, and I switch up the order of that different times, but essentially using those languages throughout your post. So for example, if I wanted to tell a story, it could be, I remember the first time I put out my first offer for $25. You know what it's like as an entrepreneur when you put yourself out there and no one signs up. We often doubt our worth or whether we're good enough or whether people care what we have to say. And that's why I'm so excited for you to join me next week, where I'm going to be teaching you how to launch your next offer. But you see how now it's a kind of a back and forth. So utilizing those words that you, me, we, I throughout your post instead of it just being one or the other.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I was working with a client once. She was thinking about doing a retreat. I don't typically do retreats, but she was thinking about doing a retreat. One of the things that she said was, this would be great. I could do a retreat in this place that I've always wanted to visit. And so that will be the ideal place. People tend to think of retreats. I get a chance to go to this place or this destination I've always wanted to go to. And I could bring other persons along for this transformation, but then I don't have to pay out of pocket per se for it. How do you choose where the retreat location should be?
Yeah, so thus far, I personally have never hosted a retreat somewhere I'd not already been.
Okay.
I can't say that I never will. I just haven't done that. And so the places I've chosen have all had a significance to me. So going to Tulum, for example, that was the first place I did a solo trip and really started to discover who I am when I travel alone. What do I actually like instead of what do my friends want to do? I took another group to Tuscany, Italy. That was another place that I did like a eat, pray, love solo travel journey with myself on. So they've all had, and Bali, for example, was the first time I went on a retreat. I went to a retreat center for a week. And that's actually where I came up with the idea of hosting retreats. And so I took a group to Bali. So they've all had some significance to me, but I do get the sense of you also wanting to explore somewhere new or go back somewhere even. And great, I could also quote unquote go for free. Now, the thing that people don't realize is that this is not a retreat for you. So you are going to be working. So unless you are tacking on time before or after, you're not going to feel like you visited anywhere, because you are going to be not just working logistically, but you are emotionally present with people, you are hosting people, you're making sure they're having a great experience. So it's not about you. So I always say it is somewhere new, especially, to make sure that you add a few days before or after and that you incorporate that into your actual budget to make sure that you're pricing to be able to cover all of those costs, because a retreat is not a retreat for you.
I like that. Retreat is not a retreat for you. Okay. It's for the people. And so it's interesting that you said that you typically go to a place where you've already been. Why is that? Is it because you feel comfortable with the location? You think, okay, this feels like a good place to bring in the attendees. Why is it that you typically do that? And is that something that you would recommend for others who are interested in retreat?
I think if it's your first retreat, yes, you should go somewhere that you at least know that you like, because your ideal attendee probably is somewhat similar to you. So, not every country is the same, has the same customs, has the same culture. And so if you're for the first time going somewhere with a whole group and then you all decide to figure out on that trip that none of you like that place, you probably could have figured that on your own. So yes, if it's your first one, I would not recommend going somewhere that you've never been before. Also, it just helps with understanding how things work, finding vendors and things like that. But as I was saying, for me, I've just chosen places that have significance to me. So places that I really love and enjoy as a solo traveler, because a lot of the women that join me are coming completely alone. And so I'm thinking of what their experience will be like. Some of them, it's their first time leaving the country. So I want to make sure it's somewhere that would be like a nice first step for someone that's never traveled outside of their home country before. And then, yes, it does obviously, again, make things easier logistically. Now, I would feel comfortable planning somewhere I've never been. I think it just, again, I just like going places that have a significance or are really special to me, because that's just how I've chosen the places so far. But I definitely would go somewhere that I have not yet gone, but want to go. But I would make sure that I add extra time for myself before or after.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Sure.
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier about profitability and pricing, and that you want to add the extra leg on, and that's something that you have to add into your budget so that you'll price it for profitability, or at least for you to be able to break even for the trip.
Yeah.
So can you talk about your pricing strategy? And one of the things that I've noticed is the budget is sometimes loose when people are thinking about planning an event.
Yeah.
Right. Right. I want to get this place. This seems like a good price. I want to have this good. It seems good. And so what ends up happening is that midway through, you're already selling tickets, but the person doesn't even know whether or not what's that number that they need to get.
Yeah.
They're not tracking what it takes to be profitable. And so can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think it's such an part of the conversation outside of the, being in this beautiful location, really connecting with your attendees and really providing them a transformational place. You want to ensure that you are making money, right? You're profitable.
Or not, at least not losing money.
I was about to say that. Or at the very least, you're not losing money, right? So talk about, how do you price profitability with your retreat?
Yeah. So most people that come to me or find me, my first question is, what's your break even number? And they all say, I don't know, but they're already selling tickets. And that is a scary place to be in, because that means you've made up a random price that has no context of your actual costs. And so the first thing that I teach my clients is how to do a budget before you even think about pricing. So figuring out even if you don't book your venue yet, what are average costs of venues in the place that and then also just like general vendor costs. A chef in Bali is a very different cost from a chef in Mexico, from a chef in Italy. And so getting some initial like quotes, like how our parents would always say, get 3 estimates for things with your house, get like 3 different quotes that you have a general sense and can have an estimated budget. It's not going to be your final budget, but at least you can have some real numbers that you didn't just make up or Google, because even Google can give you a very wide range that isn't necessarily accurate. And so then once you have a budget, then you can price. One, you can know your break-even cost, what's your max number of attendees based on the type of venues you're looking at. So what's the hard cost per person? So maybe your total, I'm making this up, but your total budget's $10,000. You can fit a maximum of 10 people in the space you're looking at. So you know that your hard cost is $1,000 per person. So to just break even, you at least need to charge $1,000 per person. But then if you want to make a profit, what does that look like? And what percentage profit margin are you doing for a private room versus a shared room? And so those are, we have an actual budget tracker with formulas and things that I use for my retreats that I give to my clients. But again, I just recommend for everyone to first do a budget and actually make your pricing based on the actual hard costs that you're estimating, and do include your costs and your team's costs, or people that are helping you plan the retreat, or your travel there, because those are like, you wouldn't be traveling there if you weren't hosting a retreat. So that is part of the budget. Some people forget to include themselves in the budget, but that is part of the cost of producing the event. And budget, and I mean, retreats can be really expensive. So if you don't do this, you could, in the same way that you can make $10, $20, $30,000, you can lose $10, $20, $30,000, which is a lot of money to lose.
Yeah. And the thing too, you could lose $10, $20,000. And sometimes you don't even know that that's how much you lost. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, like this account looks light, but I'm not even really sure. Wow.
Which I find so fascinating. I have clients come to me all the time and we'll do a call together, and they'll say, I know I didn't make money. I'll say, well, how much did you lose? I don't know. And then I'm like, how do you not know how much money you lost?
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's like, how do you pivot, the next go around to say, all right, well, I lost $10,000. I'm going to make sure that I at least get to break even. But you don't know how much you actually get from the previous.
Yeah, because they're not tracking the numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the thing. You can't make a budget just one time and think it's over. You have to keep updating it throughout the entire planning process because things may adjust and change. And aisles always have a certain percentage allocated for miscellaneous costs. There's always going to be something you didn't think about. You want to make sure that you have buffer because things come up.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, so what are some other financial pitfalls that you've seen, or what are some ways that people can save money that they might not be aware of?
Yeah. So one of the things that more recently some private homes and villas offer is an all-in-one package where they give you the chef and the driver, but sometimes that ends up being far more expensive. So while you may love the venue, if they're saying that you have to use their chef, their photographer, you definitely want to make sure you're getting comparable quotes to make sure that it is equal or the same, and that you actually like the chef's menu and the photographer's photos and all the things. So I do see people fall for that where they think they're getting this great bundle deal.
Like
you don't have to do any of the planning because it's all there, but then you spent maybe double the cost than you actually needed to on those things. So definitely pay attention to that. Also, payment plans are great for people, which is why I tell people if you're doing an international retreat to start planning 9 to 12 months in advance so that by the time you launch it, people still have a good amount of time to pay it off. And I don't recommend having the payment plan go beyond the date of the actual retreat, because then if the payment fails, you've already paid everything out for that person. So definitely offer payment plans because that makes it more affordable and an easier yes for people. But just be mindful of how long you're extending the payment plan to make sure that it's also working with the payment schedule you have to make to pay your vendors and your venues, because not everyone has access to a credit card or a checking account in their business that has funds there for it. And so, especially for my first one, I had to be cautious of, okay, I'm getting this deposit now. When is the next payment coming in? Can I afford to pay the balance of the venue that's going to come out on this date? It's a kind of a juggling act that you want to think of ahead of time.
So it's aligning those dates then with the dates that you also have to pay out to vendors or the venue. So can you talk about what are some other ways that retreat hosts can make money from their retreat? Considering it's a smaller number of persons there, how do you transition that into an upsell? How do you approach to it?
Yeah, so it's going to depend on what you do in your business. I'm obviously a coach. Not everyone is a coach, but if you are a coach, because I know a lot of coaches host retreats, I think that's an easy transition where they've gotten this actual real in-life experience with you. How can I continue to work with you? So whether you have a group program or one-on-one program or a course or some digital product that they can purchase to kind of continue the work that they've started in those few days together, or even if you're not a coach, your next event or retreat. So ideally you want to have at least the date and price solidify before you go to host the retreat you're hosting, so that before everyone leaves that retreat, you can say, this is a great experience. And guess what? We're about to open sales for our next location in 6 months, a year, whenever that is. And because you guys came to this one, I'm going to give you, I'm making $500 off or whatever it is. Giving that group something special since they came to that first retreat can be helpful as well. But yeah, upsells can, even if you do find yourself in the red, that's a way to come out of the red. I started doing a 3-day event/retreat. I say that because they don't stay overnight. They come and go, but it is very retreat-like in that it's not a conference. And our first one was it wasn't 3 days. It was just 1 day. And we had 30 people come. And I knew that I was going to be negative $6,000 to put on the event, but I was willing to do that to try out this new event that I wanted to do and keep costs affordable for people, especially a lot of people flew in just for 1 day. And at the end of the 2-week period after that retreat where I was selling things to that group that came, we made another $36,000. So that negative $6,000 became a positive $30-something thousand.
Yeah.
Just because those 30 people had an experience and now they want to continue to work. And I gave different options from retreats to my grid programs to one-on-one programs. Now, it doesn't always happen that many people sign up, but if you have a group of 10 people, at least one person is going to want to do something with you. So it is a nice way to continue that. And also I've had clients sell out their next retreat from the retreat that they're on, like their first retreat. Just those attendees are like, I love this so much. sign me up for next year. One of my clients just did that. She took a group to Mykonos and she's already sold out her retreat for a year from now.
Yeah, so it was pretty much for her. She doesn't even have to do marketing. She might be thinking to herself, all right, let me do another retreat.
Yeah, I know.
And just do the marketing for that. So you mentioned that you're a coach, and so it becomes a natural extension. Is there any businesses that you think that retreat might not be a good fit for? Or is there any businesses that you think that particularly a retreat is a great fit for?
Yeah. So actually, a lot of my clients that work with me on getting help with their retreats don't have a business. So they are just working 9 to 5, but they have a passion or a story. So like you said, one of your clients who was going through a divorce, I have that a lot. Or, and I've been on this kind of self-discovery journey and I would love to share that and be in community with other women and maybe host that for my friends and my network. And so this is their first venture into entrepreneurship, is hosting a retreat. So I don't think you actually have to have an existing business to bring together a group of 5 to 10, 15, however many people that you want. I think that it's being clear on what is the transformation, which everyone has a story, everyone has some gift that you can bring to a group of people. And when I say you're hosting the retreat, you also can be part of the experience too. While you're the curator, it doesn't mean that you have to be this expert or perfect, coach or whatever it is, to bring together a group who wants to have an intentional experience in a different location. So no, I don't. And then to answer your question, I don't think that there is a business that it necessarily doesn't work for. I had someone recently comment on an ad that is running about my class and say, I'm a chef. Can I host retreats? And I was like, why? You could do a retreat for other chefs. You could do a retreat where you are creating a culinary experience for clients, for people, for whoever. Like there's so many different ideas. Yeah, you have to figure out what you're passionate about and because you're going to be talking about it probably a lot more than you want to. I always say you haven't started marketing until you're over it. Like you should be like, I don't want to talk about this anymore. And then you can say you've started marketing it. And so it has to be something that you actually feel passionate about, even if that's not your current business or your current job.
That's so interesting because I was actually surprised by your response. That a lot of your clients aren't actually business owners. I had made up in my mind who I think that these people are.
I would say probably 40% are existing business owners, full-time business owners, and more than half. So 60% are, I don't have a business. I've never done anything like this. Maybe they posted like a friend thing or a vision board party or something very lightweight. And they're like, but I really feel a call to do this. And I've seen them bring those to life. And like you said, some are just doing it as a side passion where they do one a year. I've seen others completely transition and that's their core business now.
Oh, that's interesting. What are some things that retreat hosts or those who are aspiring retreat hosts need to think about in order for them to cause transformation for the attendee?
Yeah, I think you have to be really clear on not just what your ideal attendee is experiencing and what they want, but why do they want it? So for example, I'll just use my ideal client that is a new entrepreneur. I think the big thing, which I'm thankful less people are claiming this now, is that everyone wants to make their first 10K month. But that's not really what they want. And so I need to go behind the why do they want that? They don't just want $10,000 in their bank account. Why do they want that? They want to be able to put their kids in private school, take their mom on a 5-star vacation that they never could before, be able to actually be confident to say, other people see value in my work and feel the self-worth and pride of actually putting something that their heart's passionate about. And so when I start to get into the why behind why they want the thing that they want, then I can start to look at, okay, what activities, conversations, workshops, prompts, reflections can help someone really get clear on their vision for their business, their ideas, their bigger why, their fears or their inner blockages, their self-sabotaging behaviors that might be in the way of that. So I think it's really doing a very deep dive on your ideal attendee and not just they're this year's old, they are this sex, this race, this location. That's all fine, but I'm more interested in where they are emotionally, mentally. What are they thinking about in the shower? What are they saying to their partner in the bed at night? What are they saying to themselves driving into work in traffic? Those inner dialogues that are both what they want, what they don't want, what they're not happy with, what they are happy with, that will help you get clear on, okay, what are some of the steps that I can take someone through? And obviously it's going to depend on how long your retreat is, right? What you can do in one day is very different from what you might do in 7 days. And even 7 days is limited. So I always say we're not God. We're not trying to solve someone's entire life in a 3-month coaching program or a 1-week retreat, but what is the A to B transformation that you can help someone get to on their way to their A to Z?
Yeah, absolutely. When marketing's talked about it, it's from that very route demographic perspective. Where do they live? What kind of car do they drive?
Yeah.
Like that. I think like that doesn't speak to who the person is holistically, right?
Yeah.
It goes back to what you were talking about with market research, is having conversations with people. Maybe it might be uncomfortable to have those conversations because number one, you're like, I don't know what to ask or how to ask it, or are they even going to be open to sharing? And I found that people are typically open to sharing where challenges that they're going through. And if it's where you're creating a space where they are not feeling like you're asking them these questions so that you could now turn around and be like, I know I have a program for you, right? Which ended up, guys, like, it's like, it just feels like my trust was betrayed. That's happened to me before, right? Where, they had reached out to me, send me a message in the DM. They're like, hey, I want to know about your business. I wasn't challenged. I was like, sure, absolutely. I set up a call, right? And we're on the call, and then it's like, okay, well, I have this $5,000 program, and I don't know who is telling these people that this is something that they should do, but immediately I was not interested, right?
Yeah.
Immediately I was not interested. But when I worked with a coach, she did say to me, hey, you have to do market research. And so I had that moment where I was like, well, I don't want to be like that person, right? Like, right? And
you don't have to sell a single thing. You don't have to ask them to come on your retreat. They don't need to come on your retreat. It's not about that.
Exactly. And so for me, that was me being able to gather information. But the more I understood who that person was that I needed to be speaking to, and I understood that on a more psychological level as opposed to it just being, well, they drive this type of car. And so I think it's so important when we think about marketing and thinking about marketing strategies, really understanding your ideal client from that psychological perspective of how it is that they're thinking, so you can speak specifically to that to bring them into your event. So I'm glad that you brought that up. We've talked about some of the financial pitfalls or things that you've learned. Talked about some of the marketing pitfalls. What are some other lessons that you've learned from hosting your own retreats that you want to make sure that listeners are mindful of, or some of the things that we should be considering?
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind is if you're hosting in another country, be aware of language differences and different things meaning different things to different cultures. So, and something as simple as printing in most countries, they don't use inches or feet. And so you want to make sure that your size is actually the size that you want it to be. That can be an unpleasant surprise.
Oh my goodness.
When you get something that is not the size that you thought it was. Also, just making some connection for the group before they arrive. It's always weird when you're traveling somewhere alone. You don't know anyone. Maybe you just know this person off Instagram. And so try to make it less weird for people. I host 3 retreat calls about 2 months prior where everyone gets to share why they're coming, what they're looking for, a little bit about themselves. So that by the time they all arrive, they know each other on some level. It's not this weird, awkward, who's going to talk first situation. So just creating some group dynamics even before the first day of the retreat can, I think, really, really be helpful. And then just being open to change, like you're going to have a plan and a schedule, but it's probably not going to go as planned. Either something goes longer than you thought or a vendor doesn't show up. And so just knowing that there's very few things that can completely ruin the experience. And so don't overthink when something doesn't go perfectly planned, and just being open to switching and adjusting and even adapting. Maybe you thought you were going to do a workshop on XYZ topic, but you're realizing the group all is talking about something else. And maybe it would make more sense to do an activity or just an open dialogue around that, and being open to adapting to the actual group, especially since it is a smaller group, in real time.
No, I love that. So thank you so much for coming on the Adventures podcast, talking more about the experience with hosting retreats and letting others know that they can host the retreats themselves. And even if you launch your retreat, it was not successful, do not stop. Keep going. You talked about your own experience doing the market research in order for you to then sell out into. So that's possible for you. And so I hope that you're encouraged by this conversation. And before we close out, what is one last gem you would like to leave the listeners with? It could be related to retreat. It could be related to business, life, anything. What's one last gem?
Yeah, I think it goes on what you just said, which is honestly, I've now, I think, worked with almost 2,000 clients. And I always ask myself, what's the difference between clients who reach or succeed their goals and the clients that don't? And it isn't that one is smarter than the other, or even that one has a better idea. I've seen ideas that I thought, I don't see how this is going to work, exceed, and other ones I thought were amazing, completely fall flat. It is the person inside and that willingness to keep going, to be able to, the willingness to make mistakes, to fail, to get the data. You can't get data if you're not willing to make mistakes. You have to make a few mistakes to get the information that you need. And so for everyone listening, you can have literally anything you want. And I know that sounds very cliche, but I truly believe it. And I think the question I ask myself every day is, how can I get out of my own way today? And so I would just encourage you to ask that question to yourself. Have your cry, have your moment. I have them too, but then pick yourself up and say, okay, now how can I get out of my own way and keep moving forward?
Absolutely. How can I get out of my own way and keep moving forward? I love that question. I would love for you to check out her free masterclass. We're going to have that linked here in the show notes, as well as her social media handles and websites. If you'd love to connect with Natanya, please do so at the links below. I hope you caught those 7 clicks. Bye.